I am so excited for today's video because I get to talk about some more books that I absolutely loved this past year. I did just post my top 10 reads from 2022, so if you did miss that video and you wanted to check it out, I'll have a link down below for you. But I had such a fun time filming that I honestly wanted to do it again. So I decided I'm going to be sharing with you all of the books that were in the running for my top 10, but didn't end up making the cut because my top 10 ended up being my top 10. I still think that all the books I'm going to be talking about in today's video are very much worth read. I had an amazing time reading them, and I was considering them for my top 10 reads of 2022. They just didn't end up making it into that video, so I'm gonna make a video just for them. But before we get into the books, I wanted to quickly share with you a couple of words from the sponsor of today's video, which is Evie Bloom. She's the author of a brand new release called Ship It, which is a story about a girl named Sarah who recently got a brand new job at a startup company in Silicon Valley. So she ends up going out to a bar right at the beginning of the book just to celebrate and everything like that. And she ends up bumping into this guy named Nathan and has a one-night stand with him, thinking that she's never gonna see him again. And then where do you know she bumps into him 2 weeks later at her brand new job because he is working there as well. So it's a little bit awkward, but they're just gonna try to forget about what happened between the two of them and move forward with just having a professional relationship. But obviously, as they keep on working together, being near each other, a friendship is going to bloom, and then their attraction is going to keep on simmering. They're going to remember why they originally slept together, and a romance is going to end up happening between the two of them. But even beside for the romance that's going on in this book, you do also have that whole Silicon Valley startup setting, which makes the story very unique and different than a lot of other books you've probably read in the past. And it does also have a lot of other things going on in both of the characters' individual lives, with things that they're dealing with their family and things along those lines. And because it is dual POV, you really get to dive deep into that as well. So if you are a fan of reading books that have very strong female characters, and like I already said, books that start off with a one-night stand that ends up turning into more, it has that workplace environment situation, a little bit of a forbidden aspect because of the situation that they're in, and then also it does have a tad of a love triangle. So if that does sound like it's something up your alley, check out the link that I'll have in the description below where you can purchase this book, look more into it, anything that you're interested in. So thank you again to Evie Bloom for sponsoring today's video because I really do appreciate it, and make sure to check out her new release, Ship It. So now for my almost favorite books from 2022. First up, we have Blindside and Quarterback Sneak by Candy Steiner. So this is the second and third book in her college football romance companion series. It does have a name, but I don't remember what the name is. But either way, let's do one at a time. Blindside up first because it's second. So this is a fake dating scenario. You're following this guy who was on the football team, and his girlfriend had recently broke up with him. So he ends up fake dating one of the girls that's on his media team that works for his football team because she happens to have a crush on this guy that has no clue that she exists. So by dating him, she'll be able to get his attention of sorts because he's very popular since he's on the football team. So they get themselves into this situation, and then obviously while they're trying to win these other people over, they're gonna end up falling for each other instead. So this book was so freaking good, and I really loved it the majority of the time that I was reading it. The only issue that I had with it, the only thing was the third act conflict, because it was the only moment that actually reminded me that I was reading a book, because this was one of those stories where I was just reading it and I kept flipping the page and I literally forgot that I was reading as I was reading it. But then I got to the end and it was such a classic bookish sort of thing that it just bumped it down from being an absolute perfect sort of book for me. But I still really loved the story, and it wasn't anything too crazy that made the book actually bad. It was just something that ended up pulling it down from a 5 stars to a 4.5/4.75 stars for me sort of thing, But anyway, I still highly recommend the book, and it was still absolutely amazing. So if you are a fan of The Deal by Elle Kennedy, then I highly recommend reading this book, because if you liked The Deal, you're definitely gonna like this one because it is so similar in so many ways. And then for Quarterback Sneak, so this one actually has a funny story. This one was so close to making it into my top 10 reads of 2022. I cannot even tell you. I was sitting on my list for literally probably 2 weeks, just making sure I was very happy with what books I ended up deciding to post as my top 10 reads of 2022. And this book was sitting there literally the entire time. And then the morning that I wake up to pull all the books off of the shelf, I ended up seeing one of the books that I was considering going into my top 10, but I just decided on not. And I'm you know what? I think I really want to put that in my top 10. So this one was the one that ended up getting bumped down. And I'm not going to tell you which book it was that ended up swapping out places for this one into that video. But I will say that this one was so freaking close to being on my absolute favorite list of 2022. It just did not make it. So probably out of all the books that I'm sharing with you in today's video, if you're going to take just one recommendation from me based off of how good the book actually is, this is the one that you should probably listen to me on, because oh my God, this book was absolutely perfect. So in this story specifically, you're following the captain of the football team as he's going to end up having a forbidden romance with the coach's daughter, who is 100% 100% off limits. So this book does have a very classic storyline. If you read a lot of sports romances, you've probably come across like this basic plot line before. And this book definitely does end up playing out in like the natural trajectory of where those stories usually end up going. But what I really loved about this book and what really stood out to me as something a little bit different was how it ended up playing itself out. Like just all of the details about the book really blew me away. Like I was such a fan of the way that the relationship was being built up. I loved seeing how both of these characters were so unique in their own way, and just the way that they connected, the chemistry that they had between the two of them. Literally just everything about the book really ended up just standing out to me as something so freaking good. I highly recommend checking this book out if you are a fan of damaged characters, because both of these characters are damaged in their own way. They kind of like, that was something that they ended up connecting on, and I really loved seeing how they kind of saw themselves and the thing that they were struggling with in the other person. That was what like initially like drew them to each other, and just the way that like that all was built up was so freaking good. So if you're a fan of damaged characters, if you're a fan of sports romances, if you like college settings, oh my god, do I recommend checking this book out, because I'm honestly like reconsidering, should I put this on my top 10 or not? I don't know, but either way, it made it into this video and I highly recommend it. So this past year was actually the year that I had found Candy Steiner as an author, and I have been slowly making my way down her backlog. And I wanted to share with you one more book by her that I ended up really enjoying, and that book is On the Rocks. So this is the first book in her Becker Brothers companion series. I did read the entire series this past year, and it was solid, but I loved this one by far the most. So this is a small town romance. You're following this girl named Grace, who is the mayor's daughter, and she's currently engaged to a politician. She's kind of like marrying somebody that she knows will make her parents happy. She kind of knew her entire life like that is what she was going to do. She just has to like fulfill the family legacy of sorts. And basically at the beginning of the book, she comes back home to her small town to start getting ready for her wedding. And that is when she bumps into Noah, which is one of the Becker brothers who are all known around town to be a little bit of troublemakers. And he happens to be a handful of years older than her. They kind of like have known each other their whole lives because, you know, they grew up in the same small town, but they've never really been in the same circles, never really been friends or anything like that. And happens to be, he works at a whiskey distillery, and she's going to the distillery to go and get her fiance one of the barrels, like as like a wedding present of sorts. And when they bump into each other, you know, he's going to end up noticing that she doesn't look as happy as she should be if she's about to get married and everything like that. So he ends up pointing it out. He's like, look, you know, you don't have to get married if you don't want to get married. And she's like, no, I do have to get married. I have to make my family happy. And then he basically is going to try to convince her to like do what makes her happy instead of doing what makes her parents happy. And that is more or less like, you know, where the story is going to go. So they're going to keep on bumping into each other, like, you know, throughout the summer that this like story is taking place in. And he's going to start pining after her, but obviously she is extremely unavailable, so he doesn't really know what to do about it. So instead he ends up just like becoming her friend, starting to help her out and everything like that. And then obviously she's going to start to really question if she really wants to get married to this guy or not. And then obviously the story is going to go wherever it's going to go. So it was a really fun romance. It was probably one of my favorite small town romances that I read this past year. And I read a lot of small town romances this past year, so that is really saying something. So if you're a fan of age gaps, if you like small town romances that have a little bit of a forbidden aspect, I highly recommend giving this one a shot. The next book that I wanted to share with you is Focus by Carl Sorensen. So this is the first book in her Ward Sisters companion series. And if you did watch my top 10 reads from 2022 video, then you know that Forbidden, which is the fourth book in this companion series, did end up making it into my favorite list of this past year. So this was the book that I was actually considering. I was like, should it be Forbidden? Should it be Focus as my favorite of the year? Because I really loved both of them equally. And the only reason that Forbidden really ended up winning out was because I had read that book twice and I had only read this book once. So I felt like that one deserved to go as my favorite, you know, of the year. So this one ended up getting bumped down, but I still absolutely loved it. So in this story specifically, you are actually following two people that you met originally in her previous series. So in The Marriage Effect, which is the third book in another series, the Washington Wolves series, I think is what it's called. Either way, in that third book in the story, you're following a marriage of convenience between this guy who's a football player and then this girl who's a model, and they're going to end up getting into a marriage of convenience for whatever reason. But basically, that guy has four little sisters who end up being the four girls that get the four books in this series, which is the War Sisters companion series. And happens to be in that book, you do get to see this girl when she is in high school, and she happens to have a crush on her next door neighbor, whose name is, I believe, Noah. Yes, his name is Noah, and he currently is in college. He's like going to be a football player. He's like about to get drafted and everything like that. And one day she gets the bright idea to go next door, climb through his window, and start making out with him. And he almost gets into a lot of trouble because of that, because she was underage at the time. So after that moment, he ends up moving away, you know, from being next door neighbors with her, and they never really see each other again. And now I believe it's like 9 years later or so at the beginning of this story, and she is now working for the football team that her brother, like, you know, the older brother that was in the Marriage of Convenience in the previous book, was a part of. So she's like working on the team of sorts, and he is now a professional football player, and he is extremely focused on the game, because after that situation that happened with Molly, which is the main girl in this book, I believe her name is Molly. Don't take my word for that. I could be wrong with that. Yeah, no, her name is Molly. I have such a good memory. But basically, after that whole situation that happened, you know, between him and Molly like a couple of years ago, he has come completely sworn off women. He's like, I just have to focus on the game. I want to be the best of the best. I'm not going to let these people, like these women, deter me and everything like that. So that's why this book is called Focus, because he is just like a one-track mind sort of guy. And basically, at the beginning of this book, he ends up getting traded from another team to the Washington Wolves team, which is where this girl is now working. And basically, they're going to actually have to work on a project together for the team, whatever it is that they're doing. So it's a forced proximity situation. So they do have a little bit of a history. I wouldn't really call it a second chance romance, but basically, he wants nothing to do with her, and she is just like indifferent about it. She's like, look, I was a kid back then. Like, leave me, like, let me just do my job. And he basically just like is trying to avoid her, but they have to work together. And then obviously, his barriers are going to slowly fall down, and they're going to end up falling for each other. So what I loved about this book was seeing the progression in him. From, you start off this book where he's just completely focused on the game. He literally doesn't care about anything else other than that. And then as they slowly start to hang out with each other, he's like, he just stops caring about football as much. And all of a sudden, like, his eyes open and he realizes that this girl is in front of him, and everybody around them is realizing that he is falling for her before he even realizes that he's falling for her. And it was one of those type of storylines. And oh my God, did I love it. And now that I'm talking about this book, I feel like it should have been in my top 10 reads of 2022. So now I'm regretting this a little bit, but either way, at least I'm mentioning it now. Highly recommend checking this book out. The next book I wanted to share with you is The Devil in the Deep Blue Sea by Elizabeth O'Rourke. So this is the second book, I believe, in her Devil's Companion series. I have read the first 3 books in the series, and by far this one was my favorite, even though I've enjoyed all of them. Like, I had found Elizabeth O'Rourke this past year, and I've been enjoying every single book that I read by her. One of her other books even made it into my top 10 list. So either way, this story specifically, I really loved, and you're following this girl that is trying to give her ex-boyfriend a second chance. So she ends up going on vacation in Hawaii with him and his entire family to see if they can actually make it work. Except when she gets there, the ex-boyfriend isn't actually there, so she's gonna end up having to spend time with his entire family without him. And it happens to be he has a brother, and her and the brother, who have never really gone along in the past, like, he doesn't really like her very much, and therefore, like, she doesn't really like him either. But either way, they're gonna end up having to spend a lot of time together because they keep doing all of these fun adventures, like going surfing and hiking and things along those lines. And therefore, like, they're always next to each other, and the ex isn't there, so therefore they're going to start to like really click, hang out with each other, start to enjoy each other's company, and then she's going to start to think, maybe am I with the wrong brother? So that is more or less where the story is going to go. And it was just a really, really fun time. Like, for the majority of this book, you are spending time with them as they are literally on vacation, jumping from different island to different island in Hawaii. So it has a very like fun and adventurous sort of thing because they're doing all of these fun vacation sort of stuff. And then on top of that, you have the whole like forbidden romance sort of aspect because she's literally falling for her ex-boyfriend's brother as she's on vacation, trying to see if she can make it work with her ex-boyfriend. And then on top of that, they didn't really get along very much at the beginning of the book. So there's like a lot of banter and tension and angst, and all around the board, it was just a really, really fun time. And I highly recommend checking this book out if you have not read it yet. And the last book that I'm going to be sharing with you for today's video is Consider Me by Becca Max. So this is another sports romance. It has a very classic storyline that you see often if you read sports romances. It's one of those like I was a player until I met you sort of things. This guy is a professional hockey player. He sleeps around a bunch. He has a very big reputation of like literally like being a playboy. And at the beginning of the story, he ends up bumping into this girl at a party, and the girl ends up turning him down, even though like, he tries to make a move on her because she's not interested in just having like a one-night stand sort of thing. She's a relationship type of girl. And he really doesn't want to take no for an answer because no one ever tells him no. So he decides that he's going to chase after her and try to convince her to go on a date with him. And then obviously it's going to end up being their relationship. So it does have that I was a player until I met you sort of thing. It does have a very guy falls first, guy falls harder, he chases after her sort of situation. And even though that is something that you do see often in a lot of stories, what I liked about this book was how it just ended up playing itself out. Like, it felt very unique to me, not because of the storyline, but because of the way that the storyline ended up playing itself out. So what I really loved about this book was, first of all, just how funny the writing was. Like, it just had a very quirky personality, and the characters were just very interesting to follow. Like, this was a book that was probably a little bit longer than it needed to be, but I didn't really mind because I just really enjoyed hanging out with the characters as they were going about their lives. Like, there were so many like Monday moments where the characters just hung out and did very normal things and just had normal conversations. And because I was so into them, I really enjoyed spending all of that time with them. So even though a lot of people do say like, yeah, it's a little bit longer than it needs to be, it didn't really bother me because I was just having a great time with the characters. And then on top of that, what I really liked was how communicative both of these two people in this relationship was. Because first of all, he's never been in a relationship, so he didn't really know what it was like to have a girlfriend and just be committed to one person, and he didn't really know how to go about that. And then at the same time, she was very uncomfortable going out with him and giving him a chance because of his reputation, and it was something that like they always had to talk through. So I really liked seeing how they were both very open with each other. There was like zero miscommunication in this book, and I really loved seeing how they worked through their problems and actually like was very open open with each other. And that was something that really stood out to me as something very unique for this book. So that was why I really, really loved this book. And the only reason it honestly didn't make it into my top 10 reads of the year was because, first of all, I had books that I just liked a little bit more than that. But then on top of that, I wasn't really a fan of the third act conflict in this book. And for my top 10 reads, I really wanted to give like perfect books, like books that I had no real issues with. And in this book, I didn't love the third act conflict, but it didn't really deter me from loving the book because I loved the enjoyment of just like reading it the entire time. Like I was enjoying the ride of it. So literally like one little moment wasn't going to ruin the book for me. But still will say I wasn't a fan of like, how the ending a little played out, but I still loved the ending. So I really shouldn't be saying negative things in my almost favorite reads of the year book. So all I'm going to say is that, I love this book. It was really, really good. It wasn't perfect. There were some issues with it, but I still think it is 100% worth the read, especially if you are a fan of sports romances in general. So with that said, I'm going to stop myself here. Those were some books that I absolutely loved this past year. Highly recommend, but just did not make it into my top 10 reads of the year, but they still deserved a shout out. So either way, I'd love to hear what some of your favorite books of this year was. I know that I asked that in my previous video, but if you have some more that you wanted to share with me that were just really solid books that you think everybody should read, even if they weren't like the top of the top, then leave me a comment down below because I am always looking for good book recommendations. So either way, with that said, I'm gonna let you go. So if you did enjoy watching this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel if you are not currently subscribed. But either way, with that said, thank you so much for watching because I really do appreciate it. And until next time, enjoy reading.